I always believed in loyalty. You know, that kind of deep, unwavering trust you build with someone after years of being together. I used to tell myself that there are still good women out there, women who would never betray you, women like Jessica. She was my rock, my everything. We built a life together, shared dreams, and I believed we'd be happy until the end. Sure, things weren't always perfect. I don't have the money or the status that some people do, but I thought we had something far more valuable: commitment. I never doubted her. Not once. People talk about infidelity and cheating like it's a common thing, but I always thought, not us, not Jessica. She wouldn't do that to me. I guess you could say I was in my own little bubble, where bad things happen to other people. And maybe, deep down, I was scared of what could happen if that bubble ever burst. I wasn't ready to face that fear. The fear that the person you trust more than anyone could betray you. But back then, I was certain. My Jessica would never do something like that. I started noticing little things, you know? Things that didn't add up. Jessica started coming home later than usual. She said it was work, but it just didn't feel right. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, we've been together for years. Why would I question her now? But then, friends started making offhand comments. Nothing direct, just suggestions. Things like, "Hey Mike, have you noticed Jessica's been going out a lot lately?" Or, "I saw her the other day, she seemed a little distant." Those comments would eat at me. I'd shrug it off in front of them, pretending it didn't bother me, but inside, I was starting to feel something I hadn't felt before. Doubt. Could this be real? Could Jessica, my Jessica, be unfaithful? The more I thought about it, the more the fear began to creep in. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. I'd always been so sure of her, of us. But suddenly, that certainty didn't feel so solid anymore. There was a gnawing feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. I wasn't ready to confront it, though. Not yet. I kept telling myself, "You're just imagining things, Mike. Don't be paranoid. Jessica's loyal. She'd never hurt you." But still, the doubts lingered, and with them, the fear that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. It all came crashing down one afternoon. I remember it clearly because it wasn't supposed to be a serious conversation. Just a few friends hanging out, talking about life. We were sitting there, laughing, sharing stories, when one of them, Tom, I think it was, looked at me with this strange expression, like he was holding back something important. "Mike, there's something I need to tell you," he said. Instantly, my stomach tightened. You ever get that feeling when you just know something bad's coming? Yeah, it was like that. He hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. I didn't want to say anything, but I've seen Jessica around, and she wasn't alone. At that moment, time stopped. It was like the world went quiet, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest. Jessica wasn't alone? I tried to play it cool, to act like it wasn't a big deal, but inside, my whole world was tilting. "Who was she with?" I managed to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Tom glanced at the others, like they all knew something I didn't. "Mike, I've seen her with this guy more than once. It's not just friendly. I thought you should know." There it was. The words I never wanted to hear. My hands went cold, and a rush of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, disbelief, panic. Jessica? My Jessica? I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. I sat there, feeling like the ground had just disappeared beneath me, trying to process what he'd just said. The rest of the conversation was a blur. I nodded. I said thanks, but inside, I was screaming. Could it really be true? Was this the moment my bubble finally burst? After that conversation, I was in a daze. I kept telling myself there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe Tom misunderstood. Maybe Jessica was with a coworker. Maybe it was just a friend. Anything but what I feared. It couldn't be true. Not Jessica. She wouldn't do this to me. not after everything we'd been through together. But the more I tried to convince myself, the harder it became to shake that sinking feeling. I replayed Tom's words over and over in my head. "It's not just friendly," he said. What did that even mean? What was he trying to tell me? Was it something innocent that just looked suspicious? Or was it real? I found myself making excuses for her, grasping at straws to make sense of it all. She's been under a lot of stress lately, so I thought. Work's been crazy, and I haven't been around as much because of my own stuff. Maybe I've been distant, maybe I pushed her away. I even started blaming myself for something I didn't fully understand. But no matter how many explanations I came up with, the doubt wouldn't go away. Every time Jessica came home late or her phone buzzed with a message she didn't check in front of me, my heart would race. I'd ask her how her day was, hoping she'd tell me something that made everything seem normal. But the way she looked at me, or sometimes didn't look at me, I couldn't help but feel like something had shifted. Still, I wasn't ready to confront it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to admit that my worst fear might be real. Instead, I stayed quiet, hoping, praying, that I was wrong, hoping that somehow this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, that gnawing feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I couldn't shake it. The doubts, the suspicion, they were eating me alive. It got to the point where I couldn't just sit there, hoping everything would magically go back to normal. I needed proof. Proof that I was either right or wrong. I started small, like most people probably do, checking her phone when she wasn't around, scrolling through her messages. But she was smart. Nothing suspicious. No names I didn't recognize. No messages that raised any red flags. At least, not at first. But then I noticed the way she quickly swiped her phone away whenever I came near. The sudden stops in her texting when I walked into the room. That subtle tension in the air whenever she was on a call. I even started paying more attention to her movements. If she said she was meeting someone for lunch, I'd ask casually, "Oh, who are you meeting?" The answers were vague, and that only made me more suspicious. I'd drive by the places she said she was going, just to see if she was really there. I felt like a detective in my own marriage, but I couldn't stop myself. And yet, there was always that sliver of hope. Every time I looked for something, I was hoping I wouldn't find it. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that something just wasn't right. I still didn't have solid proof, but by then it didn't matter. My gut was telling me everything I needed to know. I couldn't take it anymore. The doubts, the tension, the constant guessing. It was tearing me apart. I knew I had to confront her, no matter how much it hurt to even think about it. I remember the moment clearly. We were sitting at the kitchen table, just an ordinary evening, but I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to know the truth. "Jessica, we need to talk." She looked up from her phone, startled by the seriousness in my voice. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. I wasn't sure, but I couldn't hold back any longer. "I know something's going on. I've heard things, seen things. I need you to be honest with me." The room went silent. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, her face pale. And then slowly, her eyes welled up with tears. She didn't need to say a word. Her silence told me everything. "I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't mean for it to happen." That was it. The words hung in the air, like a punch to the gut. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My world, my trust, my belief in her, it all crumbled in that moment. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but I just sat there, numb. She started to explain how it was a mistake, how she felt lost, how she never wanted to hurt me, but I barely heard her. All I could think about was how everything I believed in, everything we built, had been destroyed. Jessica, the woman I trusted with my life, had betrayed me. After that confrontation, everything changed. I started questioning everything about myself. What did I do wrong? Was I not enough for her? I couldn't stop the thoughts from spiraling. I kept thinking, what's wrong with me? Why wasn't I good enough? I never thought I'd be in this position. You spend your life believing that loyalty and love will keep everything together, but suddenly it felt like I'd failed in the most important area of my life. I wondered if it was because I didn't make enough money, or if I wasn't as successful as other guys out there. I mean, I'd always done my best, but maybe it wasn't enough. Every insecurity I'd ever had started surfacing. My age, my looks, my status. I compared myself to every other man out there, wondering if that's what Jessica had been searching for. The worst part was, I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't pinpoint what I did or didn't do that pushed her away. It ate at me, my self-esteem, which was already shaky from the struggles we'd been through, took a nosedive. I felt worthless, like no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough for someone to stay faithful to me. And the worst part? I couldn't shake that thought. Was this my fault? After that night, I withdrew. It's like I built this wall around myself. I couldn't face the world, couldn't face anyone. I mean, how could I? I felt so humiliated, so broken. It wasn't just that Jessica had cheated, it was everything that came after. The endless questions in my head, the emotional storm I couldn't seem to control. I found myself avoiding people. Friends would call, check in, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was I supposed to say? That my wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted, had betrayed me? That I was a mess, barely holding it together? I couldn't stand the idea of people knowing what had happened, of them looking at me with pity. The house felt emptier than ever. I would sit there, alone, in silence, going over everything in my head. Some days, it was like the pain was too much to handle, and I'd just sit there, staring at the walls, wondering how my life had come to this. The memories, the future I thought we had, it all felt so distant now. I started pulling away from Jessica too. It's not that I didn't want to fix things, but I didn't even know how to start. I couldn't trust her, couldn't even look at her without feeling that wave of anger and hurt wash over me. So, I distanced myself. It was easier that way, even if it meant facing the crushing weight of it all alone. Eventually, the isolation became too much. I couldn't carry it all by myself anymore. So, I reached out to a couple of close friends at first. I didn't even know where to start when I told them. It's like the words just got stuck in my throat. But once I started talking, it all came pouring out. The affair, the confrontation, everything. I was surprised by how much it helped, just saying it out loud. They listened. They didn't judge me, didn't make me feel small. They were just there. But the thing is, everyone had different opinions. Some said, "You need to leave her, Mike. You deserve better than this." Others said, "Maybe you can work through it. If you still love her, you should try." I didn't know what to do with that advice. They meant well, but hearing all these conflicting views just made me feel more lost. Then, I spoke to my family. My brother was furious, immediately telling me to walk away, that I shouldn't give her another chance. But my mum, she was more understanding. She told me relationships are complicated, and sometimes people make mistakes. She reminded me of the years Jessica and I had spent together, the good times. I appreciated her words, but it only added to my confusion. I realized that no one could make this decision for me. No amount of advice could tell me what to do. At the end of the day, it was my life, my marriage, and my future that was on the line, and I still didn't know which way to go. After all the advice, the long talks with friends and family, I still didn't have a clear answer. The decision to stay or leave weighed on me every single day. One minute, I'd think about everything Jessica and I had been through. The memories, the years we'd spent together, the life we'd built. I'd tell myself that maybe we could find a way to fix this. Maybe somehow we could rebuild the trust, even though it seemed impossible. But then the anger would hit. I'd remember the betrayal, the lies, and all those nights when she was with someone else, behind my back. How could I stay after that? How could I live with someone who could hurt me like that? It felt like my heart and my mind were in a constant battle. Leaving meant walking away from everything we'd created, starting over from scratch. And at my age, that terrified me. I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to start from zero, wondering if I'd ever find happiness again. But staying, that felt like betraying myself, like ignoring the pain and pretending everything could go back to the way it was. I realized there was no easy answer. Whatever I chose, it would hurt. But I knew I couldn't sit on the fence forever. At some point, I'd have to make a choice, to stay and try to rebuild, or to walk away and find something new, something better. The hardest part was knowing that, whichever path I took, life wouldn't ever be the same again. After weeks of emotional exhaustion, something inside me shifted. I couldn't keep living in that fog of pain and indecision. I had to start picking up the pieces, whether I stayed with Jessica or not. I needed to find my strength again, the part of me that had been buried under all the heartbreak. It wasn't easy, though. I had to force myself to focus on things outside of the marriage, outside of the affair. I started going to the gym more often, just to clear my head. I reconnected with old hobbies, stuff I'd stopped doing over the years because life had gotten in the way. It felt strange at first, trying to find joy when everything still hurt so much, but with every small step, I felt a little stronger, like I was slowly regaining control over my life. I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about rebuilding myself from the ground up. I couldn't rely on Jessica or anyone else to give me that sense of peace I needed. It had to come from within. And bit by bit, I started to believe that I could move forward. There were good days and bad days, of course. Some days I'd feel like I was making real progress. Other days, the weight of it all would come crashing back down. But I didn't let myself sink too far. I knew I couldn't let the pain define me anymore. It wasn't about pretending the betrayal didn't happen. It was about finding the strength to keep going, despite it. I wasn't looking for it. Honestly, after everything with Jessica, I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready for another relationship. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. That's how I met Sarah. It started off slow, just casual conversations, nothing serious. I wasn't ready to jump into anything, and honestly, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. But there was something different about Sarah. She was kind, understanding, and never pushed me to talk about my past, though somehow she seemed to understand I was carrying a lot. We connected in a way that felt easy, and after everything I'd been through, that felt like a breath of fresh air. At first, I was cautious. How could I trust again after what had happened? How could I open myself up to someone new when I was still healing from the betrayal? But Sarah was patient. She didn't push me or expect more than I was ready to give. And slowly, I started letting my guard down. It wasn't an instant love story, far from it. But piece by piece, Sarah showed me that maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. A different kind of happiness, one built on trust and understanding, not just the fairy tale beliefs I used to cling to. With her, I didn't feel the pressure to be perfect or to have everything figured out. She made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe that maybe I could have a second chance at love. A real one. Building trust again wasn't easy. After everything I'd been through with Jessica, there was always that little voice in the back of my head whispering, "What if it happens again?" It took time, more time than I expected, but with Sarah, things felt different. Slowly, I started to realize that not everyone would hurt me the way Jessica had. Not every relationship was doomed to end in betrayal. Sarah was patient, and that's what I needed most. She never pushed me for more than I was ready to give, and because of that, I found myself trusting her a little more each day. It wasn't just about the big gestures either. It was the small things, the way she listened, the way she was there for me without expecting anything in return. That's how trust was rebuilt, little by little, in ways that mattered most. For the first time in a long time, I started feeling happy again. It wasn't the same kind of happiness I thought I'd have before. It wasn't based on some ideal or perfect life. It was real, grounded in the understanding that life is messy and people make mistakes. But that doesn't mean you can't find joy again. Sarah and I began to build something new, something that felt solid. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that meant more to me than anything. I realized that happiness isn't about perfection. It's about finding someone who supports you through the highs and the lows. Someone who values you for who you are, flaws and all. And in that, I found a new kind of happiness, one I never thought I'd experience after everything that happened. It was a different journey, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly moving forward. Looking back now, I realize how much the betrayal changed me. It broke me down in ways I never thought possible. But what I didn't see at the time was that it also forced me to rebuild not just the pieces of my life, but the pieces of myself I had lost over the years. Jessica. I never thought she could do what she did. And yet, she did. I can still remember the look on her face when I finally told her I was leaving. The panic, the desperation in her eyes. She begged me not to go, swore she'd change, that we could fix it. But it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no going back. It's strange, isn't it? How someone can be everything to you one moment, and then just nothing the next. I thought leaving her would feel like freedom, like a weight off my chest. And in some ways, it did. But it also came with its own kind of pain. The pain of knowing that the person you once loved more than anything was the one who hurt you the most. I don't hate her, but I don't feel anything for her anymore. She made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. I heard she's still trying to pick up the pieces of her life, but that's not my burden to carry anymore. As for me, I found a new life, a new happiness with Sarah. But the truth is, I'll never be the same person I was before the affair. It changed me. It made me stronger, yes, but it also made me harder in some ways, more guarded. I don't trust as easily, and I don't give myself away as freely as I once did, and maybe that's for the best. In the end, what happened with Jessica was both the worst and the best thing that could have happened to me. It broke me down, but it also built me up. And now, as I sit here with Sarah by my side, I know that the pain, the betrayal, and even the heartache all led me here, to a place where I could truly heal and find love again, but this time with someone who values me for who I am. Jessica will always be a part of my story, but she's not the final chapter. That part belongs to me and to the future I've chosen to build.